Go back to India. Those were the words screamed outside a Texas City Hall in broad daylight earlier this month. In a booming suburb near Dallas and home to one of the largest and most prosperous Indian American communities in the United States, a man called Clayton Walker stood outside Frisco City Hall, screamed anti-India slogans, and tore apart an Indian national flag. Onlookers cheered, clapped. The crowd called it resistance to what they labeled as Indian immigration invasion in North Dallas. The video went viral within hours, and it was not a one-off. An Indian man in Texas, now forced to remove a Ganesha idol and other religious imagery from his home, all because a realtor told him that Hindu religious imagery made his home harder to sell.
We felt a little uncomfortable because they are saying that there are so many religious stuff, personal stuff still there. We realized that we have to make our home very, very generic to attract all kinds of people. We packed everything. We rented one of the public storage area nearby and we moved all the stuff into that storage room. We have to detach WAC and every memories that we built. So far, within 3 months, literally there is no offer. We are absolutely fine to sell this home with a loss of money.
It is the most visible flashpoint in a wave of hate that has been building for months. So why are Indians suddenly finding themselves in the crosshairs? And why has Texas become ground zero for a new wave of anti-India rhetoric? Let's start with what happened. Amid rising anti-India hostility in Dallas, another controversy has erupted. An Indian homeowner in Texas has now revealed that he had been advised to remove a Ganesha idol and Hindu religious imagery while trying to sell his house. The reason? Well, potential buyers might be uncomfortable. Individually, all of these incidents, they seem like isolated episodes. Together, they point to something larger, a growing hostility directed specifically at Indians and increasingly at Hindus. And that hostility has now reached elected representatives. Indian American Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi publicly condemned the racist chants and warned against the normalization of anti-Indian hatred. Take a listen.
Look, hate has no place in the United States. I don't care if it's directed toward Hindus, Muslims, Jews, regardless of your religion, regardless of nationality, we got to stand shoulder to shoulder against bigotry, prejudice, and discrimination toward anybody.
But the real question is this: why now? To understand the backlash, you need to understand what has happened in cities like Frisco, Plano, and Irving over the last decade. These aren't sleepy Texas suburbs anymore. They have become magnets for highly skilled immigrants, particularly Indians. Today, Indian origin professionals are deeply embedded across technology, healthcare, engineering, finance, and even entrepreneurship. Walk through parts of Frisco and you will find Indian restaurants, temples, cultural centers, and thriving businesses. Indian Americans didn't just move into these communities, they helped build them. And as their population grew, political influence followed. For many residents, this was simply demographic change. For others, it became something far more threatening, a political grievance. And that is where the phrase Indian takeover entered the conversation. A term that would have sounded absurd a decade ago suddenly began appearing at public meetings, social media campaigns, and even political rallies. What began as anti-immigration rhetoric slowly evolved into anti-Indian rhetoric. Here's the thing: hatred rarely happens or appears overnight. It is manufactured, repeated, amplified, then normalized. For months, several MAGA-aligned influencers have been turning Frisco into a national talking point. One example came from Savannah Hernandez of Turning Point USA. She visited the Karya Siddhi Hanuman temple in Frisco and posted a viral video focusing on what she described as a giant temple dedicated to a monkey god. She mocked worshippers praying for visa approvals there. The reaction online was immediate. Thousands of comments portrayed Indian immigrants as invaders. Others demanded that foreigners be sent home. Then came another influencer, Elijah Schaffer. Walking through local election campaigns, he mockingly read out Indian names of candidates running for office. Sai Krishna, Srikant Reddy, each name followed by sarcastic remarks questioning how American they were. And that's how narratives are built. First, a community is portrayed as alien, then it is portrayed as threatening, and eventually people begin believing that the community doesn't belong at all. By the time someone tears apart a flag in public, the groundwork has already been laid. But beneath all of this lies the deeper issue: jobs, especially the H-1B visa program. For decades, Indian professionals have been among the largest beneficiaries of America's highly skilled visa system. These are engineers, software developers, doctors, researchers, people recruited because American companies needed specialized talent. But America today is going through an economic and political identity crisis. Technology layoffs have shaken up Silicon Valley. Economic anxieties have grown, and in moments like these, immigrants often become convenient targets. The argument being pushed is simple. Every Indian engineer hired is supposedly one American worker displaced. Reality, of course, is much more complicated than that. Most studies show that high-skilled immigration contributes to innovation, entrepreneurship, and of course economic growth. But politics doesn't reward nuance. It rewards simple villains. And increasingly, Indian professionals are being cast in that role. Not as contributors, not as taxpayers, not as innovators, but as competitors, villains. There is another layer to the story: religion. Many recent attacks haven't simply targeted Indians. They have specifically targeted Hindu symbols, Hindu temples, and Hindu identity. Terms like Hindu takeover are becoming increasingly common because historically, Hindu Americans remained largely outside America's traditional culture wars. That appears to be changing. As India's global influence rises, Indian identity has become more visible internationally. And with visibility comes attention, sometimes admiration, sometimes resentment. Domestic American political battles are now increasingly colliding with perceptions about India, Hinduism, and immigration. For many Indian Americans, what they are experiencing no longer feels purely economic, it feels cultural. In the end, this story is bigger than one torn flag, bigger than one protest, bigger than one racist slogan. The real story is that Indian Americans have become impossible to ignore. Their wealth is growing, their influence is expanding, their political voice is getting louder. And history tells us that visibility often attracts resistance. Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi's warning is important because hatred rarely begins with violence. It begins with rhetoric, with stereotypes, with conspiracy theories, with the idea that certain people somehow don't belong. The challenge facing America today is simple. Can it remain confident enough to embrace immigration, diversity, and success? Or will fear and resentment begin writing the next chapter? Because what is unfolding in Texas isn't really a story about Indians. It's a story about what kind of America emerges from this moment, and whether the country that once celebrated immigrants can still recognize them as part of its future. This is Times Axis, where global stories meet India's perspective. Click on the bell icon to subscribe because the next big global shift will have India at its center.